you need proper watercolour paints for it to work. Student quality or artist quality is fine. The more intense the colour, the better the effect. Water-based dyes like the Analinki don't work, not well anyway, and nor do dilute acrylics. And that's because the cling film technique requires the traditional quality of watercolours drying a lighter tone than the colour that you put on. With acrylics and watercolour dyes, there is no colour shift at all. It stays exactly the same colour as you put on. And I'll explain why in a second. So I'm going to be using artist's watercolours for this. I'm using 200 gram not surface paper. You can probably see the texture here. And I'm just going to show you a little exercise very, very quickly on what you can do. So I'm using a 3/4 inch brush and just wetting my paper. Not too much water, but enough for the colours to spread and run and merge. Going with some cadmium yellow first, I think, and hopefully it's a bit clean and not green, which happens a lot. So we'll place the colour on. Maybe a little bit of cadmium red now. Just bring that around, let that drip in. The more intense the colours, the better. If you're using student quality, you may find that using it from the tube works better. Throw in a bit of ultramarine now. Get a bit of green and some of the manky colours going on, but to show you the technique. But this is how the cling film works. It doesn't work when the colour's dry, and you don't do it like a decorator's technique where you just lift the colour on and dab it off. You get a piece of cling film larger than the area that you want. Standard cling film, there's nothing special about it. Let me just get that blob of masking fluid that's appeared from nowhere. So scrunch up your cling film. So this is all still very wet. Right, this is still very wet, and we scrumple the cling film on. Now you should be able to see what's happening straight away. Can you see all those shapes forming? Now what happens is, and this is why you need to have traditional watercolours, where the cling film is stuck to the wet paint, that will stay dark because the air cannot get to it. Where the air is trapped inside the small pockets, it will dry lighter. So it's quite fun, really. You can have a bit of insight into what's going on because it will dry almost exactly the colour you've put down and the shapes you've put down. So you can have fun manipulating the cling film. If you're doing a tree, for example, you'd paint your tree trunk and you'd pull taut the cling film vertically, and that will give you ridges like a tree trunk bark. If you were doing water, pull it horizontally and the cling film will create the effect of waves or moving water. So what you don't do is get excited and peel it off now, because if you do that, you'll ruin it, because the wet paint will still be wet underneath because you're covering it in plastic, so it will take longer to dry. So you want to let it dry, then peel it off. If you were going to use this as a background for other watercolour things, you might want to mask out an image or whatever you're doing with it first so it's not affected by the cling film, or leave it and then put darker colours such as silhouettes on the top of them. So in true Blue Peter style, This is something I did a few minutes ago while I was sorting out the technical issues of doing this. So if this is dry now, I hope. I think so. So I'll peel the cling film off. And can you see the patterns and the shapes that have emerged? What you can do, there are two options actually that you can do. You can leave it exactly as it is, or you can mix up the same colours that you've used and paint back in the shapes again to intensify them. So we could put a bit of a purple shape in here. So I'm just sticking to the darker areas. Maybe a little bit more red. There. We can have some yellow, orangey yellow in these ones here. And just follow the shapes. Got some neat blue. It's up to you really how you work it. It's just having a play at what the paint does, and really we're just intensifying the really interesting shapes. It's a great background for foliage or anything plants. I've even done mountains with it before now. You know, just have a play and see what it does. I'm probably using a brush that's a bit too big for some of these shapes, but it does start to look very stained glass. So you can enhance some parts, not bother with others, or not paint them but draw around them with a pen if you wanted to. So I'm just adding a bit of yellow to this one to give this a bit of a triple tone, so a bit of blue at the other side. But once you've got a bit of you've learnt how to manipulate the cling film, there's such a lot you can do. It really is an endless possibility, because cling film will work and it will be random each time you do something. So what you could do is perhaps use the watercolour dyes to fill back the shapes again, and that may give you an even more interesting and intense colour. So I'm not doing anything other than following the shapes that have already been created by the cling film, and it just makes for an interesting design. What else you can do, let me just get it off the wall and hopefully it'll show you. This sort of deco rose design was done with cling film, and I used the cling film on top, but I pinched it between my finger and thumb, a bit like making a pie crust edge, which created the shape of the roses, and I just went over it again like I've just shown you in certain areas around the flowers and parts of the leaves to create that pattern, which is really, really useful. So that's it really. Have a go and see what goes on. I'll show you what happens though if you take the cling film off too soon, because this hasn't dried yet. So let's show you what not to do. Can you see the colour starts to run? You might want to just use one or two colours, use 3 or 4, use a whole range of complementary colours, whatever really, but don't take the cling film off until it's really dry. And also don't put the hairdryer on it, because it will lift off the cling film and it will ruin the technique. So you can see that area is dry, but where it's wet it's all started to run back into place, and the technique has been lost. So really think how you can use it, but it's perfect for backgrounds. You can do stronger things over the top. Just have a play and see how you go. So hopefully that's answered the question on what do you do with cling film and watercolour. I'll show you what I mean about water. If I mix up a bit of a sort of watercolour in watercolour, so let's go like that, and you'll be able to see it before it dries. So I'm going to keep the cling film horizontal and place it, and you can play with it, you see. You can create a shoreline and you can manipulate the cling film to do exactly what you want in the way. So you could create a wave if you sort of like bring up and bring down with the cling film. It will create more of peaks and troughs and all sorts of things, but your colour needs to be really strong underneath. If your colour isn't strong underneath, you're not going to get the contrast between the light and the dark. Imagine if that was brown and this way round, it would make a great tree trunk, or anything really. Brilliant for kids to have backgrounds, or even as a piece of an introduction to abstract art, because really you've got a little bit of control on what's going on, but not total control, so it makes life quite interesting and fun to have a play with. Great for silhouettes, shapes in the front, or for collage if you've got something that you want to put on as a background. If you have it all in shades of green, perfect for foliage background, really. The possibilities are endless with cling film. I've seen a lot of artists that will use it as a soft background, so you can just about see the changes in tone and texture, and then they'll paint flowers over the top of it, which you could do with a stronger colour or watercolour dyes or acrylics over the top. So you can mix your media up quite a lot. That hasn't dried, but it does give you the effect that you can see the patterns and the shapes based on it. If I quickly show you a rose or flower-ish type shape and what to do, if we just put a red blob there, we'll make a bit of green perhaps from a blue and a yellow I've got knocking about. Let's put that round it. It doesn't matter if it all runs into one actually, because it is a background after all, but I'll let it run in later. Right, so with the cling film I put it on, keep it fairly scrunched because that works quite well, and then if you sort of push down with your thumb, push with your finger and pinch with your finger and thumb the other way, you can create sort of fluid shapes. This is an upside down flower now, I've got that. And then when it's dry, it will create a sort of flower shape with the petals falling back on itself, like the roses I just showed you in more of an abstract sense. It's quite warm today, so it might dry quite quickly, so I can show you before I sign off. I don't want to keep you too long. As I say, I had a lot of technical issues this morning with the Facebook page, that we couldn't do a single bit of demonstration because the sound wasn't coming through. So if you joined me at 11 o'clock when I was doing it, apologies, I wasn't ignoring you, I was talking, but it wasn't being picked up at all. Let's get impatient and quickly whip that off, just so you can see the shape if you wanted it as a flower. It's perfect really for all sorts of things. The stronger the colour, the more intense the effect. The softer the colour, the lighter that you'll notice the difference between the two. So you could fill in, you know, there is so much you can do with it. it's quite fun. It would make, if you wanted to do a sort of water lilies type feel, Monet-esque style, you could do loads of greens with pinks in there and use that technique where you push down with your fingers and thumb and up with your finger to create flowers or water lilies. So really do have a good look, have a play. So the 3 crucial points are: you put the cling film down while your paint is wet, you don't peel the cling film off until it's dry, and you don't use a hairdryer on it, because if you do, you'll blow underneath the cling film and the patterns that you've got will run or just start merging, or you might end up blowing the whole of the cling film off altogether. So that is a quick demo on what you can do with cling film and watercolours. Thank you, hope you enjoyed it.